Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to our Wednesday Leading Change episode this week with Priyanka Keswani. Hi Priyanka, welcome back.
Hello, Vasco. Good morning.
Good morning indeed. So Priyanka, on Wednesdays, we want to focus on change. And of course, because we as Scrum Masters are constantly working with change, we want to talk about change leadership, the ability to help change along, help change grow within the organization. So that's the story we would like you to tell us, a change process you were involved with, and then walk us through the steps, like, how it developed over time and highlight for us what you learned, the tools, the tips, the tricks, the techniques you learned during that process that you still apply today.
As you mentioned, right, as a Scrum Masters, we are also a change agent. We contribute towards the new ways of working for the organization and all. So, as I mentioned, when my organization started moving towards the agile ways of working, as an organization, we decided to focus on the agile maturity model, right? And we started working on the internal framework, because definitely in the market we have many other frameworks to measure the agile maturity, but we decided to focus on the aspects of our company, our culture, our work, to create the agile maturity model. So as an agile evangelist, we brought together model which definitely helped the teams to transition from waterfall to agile. And this model was focusing on to assess the maturity of teams based on events, as we have a different events, we have a daily scrum, we have a sprint planning, engineering practices, and the responsibilities of a different role, right? So we focused on that. I would like to bring here one aspect what I learned. Definitely events, roles, we got the training, we have learned, but the engineering practices was one of the aspect which I learned while working on this agile maturity. And what are the things we considered in the engineering practices, that okay, we have a really good unit test, because previously when we were working with the dev team as a QA also, I would like to share an experience. Most of the time they don't have a unit test itself. Code reviews for a better quality, because if we have a code review unit test, we can easily identify defects in the dev environment itself. Focus on the test driven development, continuous integration, pair programming, refactoring. So these all the aspects were considered in the agile maturity model, and that was a new learning. And to start with, we had an agile coaches, those who used to come and help us how to run this assessment model. But maybe after 1 or 2 quarters, it was the scrum masters who was working with the team to ensure the we are moving to the right maturity level, to the right direction, and focusing on these engineering practices. Most of the time, we just focus on the process, but it's more on the engineering practice, software development cycle, focusing on the quality and CI/CD stuff. So this was a great learning.
How did you help the Scrum Masters to focus on the engineering practices? I mean, you mentioned a few engineering practices that not even all developers agree we should be using, like test-driven development as an example. So from your perspective, Priyanka, how do we help Scrum Masters, and also how did your Agile coaches help the organization to first accept and then put in practice this adoption of the Agile engineering practices?
So, as we always say, any transformation start with the pilot, right? Instead of moving for the big bang, start with the pilot. So the teams, definitely there is a resistance, because the team thinks the TDD, test driven development, it takes more time. But eventually, if we start adopting, it takes the less time. So we started with the pilot. One of the team, we got an buy-in from the team, from the management. We started with the pilot, we helped them, and we had an experts of the coaches, those who have actually worked on the TDD ways of a working, right? And then they helped it. We did the pilot, and those stories were shared with the other teams. And also to start with, Vasco, I mean, in the team, let's start few stories working in a TDD way. Maybe not everything, few stories. So inside the team itself, you will see the change. And during the retrospectives, the teams, I mean, the people, those who have worked on the stories in a TDD way, they have shared the lesson learned, which really inspires the other. So TDD was one of the aspect. Unit test, code review, and eventually, it helped, right? So this was like easily detect the defects at the dev environment, and it helped the developers itself.
So you then use the story of these pilot teams in order to communicate the impact of these technical practices. Was that so?
Exactly. And the same we do for the any initiative also, right? We do the pilot, we share the success story or the lesson learned with the other teams or the other portfolios, and then we help them to move towards the new journey.
So one thing that I'm curious about, we very often here on the change episode talk about, getting some people to get started, right? Like finding this team that wanted to try out. How did you go about it? Like, did you just ask all the teams, or how did you go about finding the team that would eventually become the pilot team?
So in this scenario, because we had some managers or the some management, those who had come from the agile background, and they were really good at the engineering practices. So they had a knowledge on that. And also we organized workshop to deep dive into how these practices works, because you should have a clear knowledge. And after those workshops or the training sessions, we ask them, teams, scrum masters, go back, discuss, because I really don't believe into pushing the things, because if the team is coming by themselves, definitely it's like accountability comes into the picture. So they went, discussed, and there were very few teams, Vasco. And here also, because initial learning phase is little slow down, right? So it also depends the teams where we had a very high criticality that we have to deliver product in this much duration, or maybe very critical customers, we didn't choose those teams. So if we had to deliver, we didn't choose that. But the teams which were like internal teams and all, we started with them, and it gradually moved to the other teams.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another aspect, right? It's like consider the impact, because it is a pilot, so obviously things can go wrong, and sometimes they do, and we need to give teams the ability to recover from that. Otherwise, they develop even more resistance to the idea of using these new practices. Definitely, starting with a pilot is a great tip, and the story of how you guys decided who would be on the pilot is also a great, insightful story. Thank you for sharing that, Priyanka.
Thank you, Vasco. Welcome.
Leading change is one of the core skills we must acquire, but it is only one of the steps towards our success as Scrum Masters. Tomorrow, on Success Thursday, we will talk about how to define success for the Scrum Master role. We'll cover tips on how to measure your way to that position, and most importantly, how to develop that focus on continuous improvement that is as important for Scrum Masters as it is for teams. See you tomorrow. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.